So this video is going to be about the build that I've been playing the most recently since Path of Exile 2's early access launched, um, which is a Corrupting Cry Warbringer. This character was leveled with Shockwave Totem, and then I transitioned out of that kind of near the end of like Act 2 Cruel. I wasn't really enjoying the way that Ancestral Warrior played, so I decided to go back to a previous idea that I'd had, which was absolute cock and ball torture to level with, because Warcry cooldowns are extremely long and Corrupting Cry doesn't last long enough, and it doesn't scale with skill effect duration like it did in Path of Exile 1. So you used to, in Path of Exile 1, you used to be able to scale Warcry duration, which would also scale Corrupting Cry duration as well. But you can't do that anymore, which has upsides and downsides. It basically means that you can run certain supports, which normally would reduce the duration of Corrupting Cry and make it kind of more difficult to keep up. But with the changes to duration and things like that, you don't need to worry about that anymore, because it's 5 seconds no matter what, basically. So you can't really play this comfortably until you get your second ascendancy, because your first ascendancy gives you explode, which is cool, but again, your cooldowns are super long. Like, even taking all of the cooldown nodes that you can find on the tree, Admonisher, Deafening Cries, and then there's a couple other ones around, sort of scattered around about the tree, small nodes and stuff like that as well. Even taking those, you'll get your Warcry cooldown to around about 3.5 seconds, 4 seconds, if you don't go super hard onto it, like as soon as you get the points going straight into it. And that means basically that you have around about 1 second to reapply Corrupting Cry, or Corrupted Blood from Corrupting Cry, before the stacks fall off. When your stacks fall off, they're worthless. And not only that, but you're relying on kind of a decent strength number, because Corrupting Cry scales from 25% of your strength. So if you have no strength, you have no damage. So basically that's why it's better to level with another skill, whether that's mace skills or, again, Shockwave Totem like I did. You really you don't necessarily need this, but it is a gigantic both quality of life and damage boost. So if you're going to play this, I would suggest wait until you hit your second ascendancy to get Great Wolf's Howl before you switch over, because you won't get access to Seismic Cry until after you would have access to your second ascendancy anyway. I'll explain a bit more about why I'm talking about Seismic Cry sort of later on. But basically, so my tree is pretty fucked, I would say. I'm not really like a build guide follower. I kind of just like throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, which usually nothing does, and so I'm very surprised when stuff does, like this build for example. And basically it's kind of just stacking as much strength as humanly possible, and that's kind of it. I've taken these just for the skill speed, because having shitloads of Warcry speed just feels good. It's very funny and very annoying at the same time to listen to. So basically, yeah, that's it. Stack strength. You don't really care about the skill mana cost converted to life, because you will be going blood magic. Now, early on, I pathed across this top section so that I could take blood magic earlier, and then as I got a few more points, I found it a bit better to sort of go straight down to the bottom and then up through the top here instead. But blood magic is huge for your sustain, because even if you take these, the Price of Freedom and all these little like conversion nodes, even at around about 40 something percent conversion, you will burn through your mana like you're pissing it out. It's horrible to maintain it. You will be chugging mana flasks and getting nowhere. So blood magic combined with urgent call is huge. because with my current setup right now, I Warcry just about 5 times per second, and as you level up Seismic Cry, the mana cost gets higher, so in turn, the life cost gets higher. So basically, the nodes here that you kind of want are Admonisher for Warcry speed. These, obviously, Warcry nodes, the cooldown nodes are kind of wasted, but it's travel nodes. There's not much you can do about that. Down here, this wheel is really important. Warcry speed, lots of Warcry speed, and then 2% of life when you Warcry. This is really, really important for basically your sustain. I've also got this node here for more Warcry speed and 20% increased damage for each different Warcry you've used recently. This one doesn't really matter too much. And again, this does have some wasted nodes. So what I would maybe look at is there's a jewel that I can't remember the name of that would basically let you allocate nodes within a circle radius. It has a different name to what it had in Path of Exile 1, which is Thread of Hope. And because you're going blood magic, it means that you're basically, there's no downside to taking this sort of wheel here that gives you reduced maximum mana. It gives you a decent chunk of strength per node, and then the last one gives you 1% increased damage per 15 strength. Because you're stacking strength, you're going to get a lot of increased damage from this, and the reduced mana is no downside because you don't use mana anyway. This I've just taken because I didn't know what else to take, and again, you're strength stacking, so more strength is really never a bad thing. I've got this just to test for. It's pretty good if you do ever end up having to block, which admittedly I don't really do too much anymore with this build, at least currently. But depending on what other skills you want to pair with this, it's pretty good. 3% plus 3 to stun threshold per strength is huge. When, you know, I'm currently sitting at almost 700 strength. That's a lot of stun threshold for holding up a shield or just not getting stunned in general. I've taken this because you're relatively tanky anyway, and it kind of gives you a bigger window to take less damage while dodge rolling, as opposed to like when you dodge roll, you get a very short window where you can't take damage. Or rather, where you will always avoid damage. So I take this just because with the setup that I've got, you have a giant health pool, or life pool rather, and I've got this for some life recovery rate because I don't know if it works for recoup like it did in Path of Exile 1, but originally I was using a specific shield for life regen, and that was really helpful for that, so I might end up respeccing that, I don't know. There's not really anywhere super important for you to go. This is area of effect and damage with Warcries. This is for 5% strength. It also helps with stun build-up, which is a big part of Seismic Cry. I run stun threshold because I'm too lazy to respec the stun build-up. This is Warcry speed and area of effect, both just pretty handy to have. Corrupting Cry reduces the area of effect of your Warcries. But this is sort of the main one where you're going to get a lot of your damage. Deafening Cries gives you 8% increased damage for each time you've Warcried recently, and recently is within the past 4 seconds. So if you're using your Warcries, say for example like I am 5 times per second, that is a lot of it's basically 80% increased damage. You can get up to 160% increased within that 4-second window if you keep screaming, basically. This, I'm kind of just pathing up towards increased defenses from equipped shield because I swapped to a higher armor shield for a reason. The stacking armor is is pretty important for the current setup that I've got because it uses a very goofy combination of items, basically. And that's why I've got heavy armor as well. 100% of strength requirements from boots, gloves, and helmets are also added to armor. This doesn't matter so much for your helmet because the helmet that I use is a low level item, so the requirement's not super high, but it gives you like an extra like 250 flat armor, which is basically like a whole other armor item, basically. Then this 3% life, it's like the only percentage increased max life node on the tree that I can see. It also gives you a little bit of strength so that these nodes aren't like wasted. And that's kind of it. For damage, you're probably better off going with Anvil's weight into imploding impacts. Now, breaking enemy armor only affects hit damage. So your Corrupting Cry will never deal more damage. Well, basically, armor will never affect it because Corrupting Cry is damage over time, even though it does deal physical damage. Armor only applies to damage from hits. Now, obviously, you could get Pylon, 60% increased damage against enemies with fully broken armor, but with the 160% increased damage thereabouts that you're getting from Deafening Cries, you're kind of going to get diminishing returns on increases. So if you have extra points that you don't really know what to throw into, I'm kind of at that point right now, because Warcries aren't considered attacks, they're not considered spells. So anything that affects attacks, so say for example these, increased damage to 200 weapons, it's not going to apply because you're not using your weapon to do anything. And that has some other implications for the skill itself in terms of scaling your damage. So, on to that. Go into the weapon first of all. There's only two stats really that you're going to be able to get any effect from on your weapon, and that is strength and life per enemy killed. None of the other stats here mean anything, and so that's why you have the rebirth rune socketed as well. Now obviously you could go for a two-handed weapon with Giant's Blood if you really wanted to. I don't think it's really that necessary. You're really only going to get an extra rebirth rune out of it. 2 with the Corrupt. Because 33 strength is the highest that both one-handed and two-handed weapons can roll, so it really doesn't matter too much. So yeah, that basically strength and life per enemy killed, only 2 stats you care about in your weapon. The base doesn't matter, really makes no difference at all. So these gloves, literally armor, strength, and life. That's it. That's all you care about. And I've got a Soul Core of Equani for 2% increased max life because stacking strength. Every point of strength gives you +2 life. And so for basically stacking strength, you're just getting shitloads of life, and then flat life increases like the ones I've got in this and in my boots. This is before I sort of started making some differences, some changes rather. I basically, the percentage increase is much better. The ring, again, literally amethyst ring for chaos res, strength and life, that's it. These are complete garbage. You could fund this build with 2 sticks of gum and a slightly bent out of shape paperclip. Strength, life, that's really all that matters. Strength, life. This has some rarity on it. Rarity is really important for like loot drops and stuff like that. I have basically none. So I'm scraping by, basically trying to make some currency. This belt, strength, life, again, literally all you need. This is something that I picked up in Axe and have not bothered to replace it. These boots, move speed, life, strength. I do have a body rune in here for flat life. Again, Hequani soul cores would be far better. There's more you can get this. Obviously, you could roll like chaos res would be huge because you have no way to mitigate chaos res with this current setup. So getting the chaos res on your gear would be slightly more expensive, but it wouldn't be super awful because you don't really care about elemental resistances. A big armor shield I was originally using Rise of the Phoenix for the 3% of life per second, and then another 3% on low life because there is a rare mod that's supposed to limit recovery to 50% that is bugged right now, and it will take you to either 25% or low life, which is 35%. I'm not too sure on the numbers, but basically this meant that you had a lot of recovery, but again, the fire res is meaningless. I ended up replacing it with this. I had balled it to try and get higher life life regen, and it fucked it basically. So this was the chest that I used leveling. Again, flat life. So basically, and then again, amulet, amber amulet, strength, rarity, life, whatever stats you can get on here. This is +2 to all spell skills, which does literally nothing. And dex, this kind of just lets you have more strength nodes on the tree, basically. So the combo that I'm using to mitigate elemental damage, and surprisingly has been pretty effective, is Veil of the Night and Blackbraid. So Veil of the Night gives you 50% increased maximum life and all attributes, which includes strength. The reduced light radius, I have not even noticed it. It's definitely not as oppressive as it is in Path of Exile 1. In Path of Exile 1, reduced light radius can feel really bad. But in this, it really doesn't feel as bad as that. Again, I do have a flat life rune. I will get another Veil of the Night at some point with a Corrupt. There's a couple of half-decent Corrupts. They're kind of expensive. But yeah, I digress. So, while this does give you 50% increased maximum life, which when strength stacking gives you a huge amount of life, if I take this off, you'll see that I go from 5,668 life down to 3,912. So this one item is giving you a huge amount of life with all of the flat life that you get from strength stacking. However, it comes with a downside of you have no elemental resistances. Now, having no elemental resistances means that they are literally zero. They cannot be increased by you, but they cannot be lowered or penetrated by enemies. So if you ever roll a map or a waystone, sorry, with elemental weakness, doesn't matter. It doesn't affect you at all. Enemies that penetrate elemental resistances doesn't matter because you can't penetrate below zero. However, having no elemental resistances is fucking awful. Especially when the game currently is kind of built around one-shots. Getting hit by, say, the lightning mirages or the periodic elemental explosions that some rares have is bad, basically. So I decided to pair that with Blackbraid because it applies your armor to elemental damage. Now, again, armor only applies to hits, so this will only apply to elemental damage from hits. Thankfully, there aren't many sources of elemental damage over time. You have Ignite, and you have some cold damage over time, and then you have the Mana Lightning Siphon Circle rare. But for the most part, you'll almost never notice this, and you have a lot of life recovery and a lot of life that Ignite really doesn't matter that much. I have never noticed Ignite doing too much to me except for Ignited Ground as like a modifier on Waystones. It also gives you a little bit of strength, a little bit of intelligence, and a small bit of stun threshold. So this is why I was saying before about stacking armor is super important for this. The heavy armor thing gives you a decent chunk. You got 104 strength requirement here, 111 strength requirement here, and fair enough, only 30 here. Even that is basically the armor that you would get from a half-decent helmet anyway. I mean, my gloves could be rolled a lot better, obviously. These have 162 strength, boots have 218, so they could definitely be rolled a lot higher. I could have better bases, etc. But this is my point, is that this build has been cobbled together with pretty shit items, and it's still performing a lot better than I thought it would. So, with a combination of Veil of Night and Blackbraid, or Elemental Mitigation, you kind of only really care about Chaos Res and Armor. Life is really a lot easier to get a good number of compared to normal. Other, other melee skills, you'd be looking at like 1 to 3k life at most, if you're lucky, whilst also having to balance elemental resistances and things like that. So currently, right now, I have 3,879 armor. The 56% estimated physical damage reduction you can completely ignore. It means almost nothing. There's calculations in place for armor that basically means that the smaller the hit, the more your armor will apply to it, and thus the bigger the hit, the less your armor will apply to it. So this 56% estimated is meaningless. You can basically ignore it. The only thing you can pay attention to is additional physical damage reduction, because that is a percentage addition to your current physical damage reduction. So say for example you have enough armor to mitigate 30% of a physical hit, an extra 7% will give you 37%. So that can come from shields and a few other places as well. So additional physical damage reduction and the estimated damage reduction are not really similar, because the estimated physical damage reduction is basically meaningless, and additional physical damage reduction is a straight percentage addition to your overall mitigation of physical damage. So higher armor means higher physical damage mitigation from smaller hits, and in this case, higher elemental damage from hits mitigation as well. Again, Chaos Res would be very nice to have. That's probably where I'll start to look at next, once I start to have issues. Block Chance is pretty good as well. It kind of depends on what support gems you want to run. But yeah. So in terms of support gems, Seismic Cry, you can actually corrupt gems for a chance at +1 level to the gem, and it can still be leveled up after being corrupted. So if you corrupt a lower level gem because you don't want to waste higher level skill gems, then you can still corrupt it, try and get the extra socket or the +1, and then still level it up with a higher level skill gem. This, for example, was a level 13 gem when I corrupted it. I used 1 lesser Jeweler's Orb to get 3 sockets, and then corrupted it for the 4th socket because I didn't want to spend 50 exalts or so on the greater Jeweler's Orb. So Seismic Cry is kind of like the main skill you use. Is very good defensively and offensively with no cooldowns and like the super low or the super high Warcry speed. Quality will give you more Warcry speed, but you do also get some just through leveling the gem itself. Now, as I said before, Warcries are not attacks, they are not spells, so any increases to spell damage or attack damage will not apply. Increases to physical damage will, and generic increased damage or more damage will also apply. It does physical damage on hit, it knocks back, it has increased knockback distance and increased stun build-up. Its hits ignore enemy monster physical damage reduction, and again, physical damage, hits specifically. Basically, it's, yeah. So your main damage really is Corrupting Cry. Corrupting Cry gives you, so it makes it so that your Warcries have 30% less area of effect. And Corrupted applies a debuff called Corrupted Blood. Now, Corrupted Blood is a debuff that deals physical damage over time and can stack up to 10 times. As it says here, Corrupted Blood is not bleeding and is not affected by any stats related to bleeding. So although it is a physical damage over time effect, it's not an ailment and it's not bleeding. So you can't scale it. You can't scale it with like bleed duration, bleed damage, or aggravated bleeding or anything like that. Corrupted blood duration is 5 seconds. Now, the duration, the wording on this generally means that it cannot be modified, which is the case in Path of Exile 2. Generally in Path of Exile, if something says blah 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 is X, it means that it cannot be modified up or down or anything like that. Say for example this, you have no elemental resistances. There's all modifiers, give or take, in Path of Exile are percentage or number modifiers. So like, for example, this reduced light radius and increased light radius are the same modifier. It's just once it passes 0 and goes into negative, it goes from increased light radius to negative to reduced or less, depending on the wording of the stat. That's why you might find if you look at the trade site, whenever you're looking for a specific stat or something like that, say you're looking for like reduced something, you might only see increased. And that basically is because increased and reduced are effectively the same stat line, just one's positive, one's negative. So Corrupted Blood deals 25% of your strength as physical damage per second. So if you have, this is why you want to stack as much strength as you possibly can, because your strength is your damage. And that's 25% of your strength as physical damage per second per stack. So 10 stacks, that's 250% of your strength as physical damage per second base, and then that then further gets scaled with your increases to damage, Warcry damage, and things like Swift Affliction, which gives support skills deal 35% more non-ailment damage over time. So this is what I was talking about before, where there's a specific support gem that in Path of Exile 1 would reduce the duration of Corrupting Cry, the Corrupted Blood debuff from Corrupting Cry, and give it a shorter duration, which meant you had to scale some duration to kind of counteract it. Doesn't make any difference in Path of Exile 2. So this is just a straight 35% more damage, basically. And then Brutality, 35% more damage. Support skills deal no chaos damage and no elemental damage, you don't care, because you're only scaling Corrupting Cry, which deals physical damage. This is 70% more damage here. And then I also have Devastate, which inflicts armor break on inflicting a heavy stun. Heavy stuns are super common when using Seismic Cry because of the 400% more stun buildup. This, you could basically swap for literally anything else that you want to use. More AoE, etc. Basically, this I only use because I threw it on and it worked fine, and then I never changed it. But I might end up looking at changes that I can make to that. Other skills that I run, Shield Charge with Stomping Ground. Stomping Ground was buffed recently, so now it deals anywhere between 80 to 120% of your strength as physical damage. This really doesn't matter too much. Because as soon as you shield charge into an enemy, you stop moving anyway, but they'll usually get hit by 2 of your footsteps depending on distance. And it can kind of help weaken smaller enemies. You're not really scaling any damage to attacks, so having this, it's kind of just a little bit of extra AoE on some things. And then I have Ingenuity for cooldown recovery rate. Using Leap Slam with Holy Descent and Martial Tempo. Leap Slam has a pretty long attack time, depending on how far away you use it, or how far away you target when you use it. Holy Descent basically gives Consecrated Ground when you land for 4 seconds, which is like a small patch of ground that gives you and allies 5% life recovery, or rather, regenerate 5% of your max life per second, and curses have 50% reduced effect. So this is kind of just a tiny bit of quality of life regen if you need it. Say you need to jump out of or something, or if you jump into the middle of a pack, this can help you stay alive with a 5% life regen. And Martial Tempo because of the long attack time. That's basically it. For buffs, I'm using Overwhelming Presence. For the reduced stun threshold, there's not really much in terms of buffs that will affect your damage. So this will help you stun easier, which is pretty good defensively. And with that, I have Cannibalism. 4% of life recovered on kill is great because you're using your life as your mana pool. So you're being able to recover 4% on life on kill is great. And then Vitality just for a bit of life regen. I'm using Scavenge Plating. Scavenge Plating for armor. Again, like I said, stacking armor is really good for your both your physical and your elemental mitigation using Veil of Night with Black Braid. 4% more armor per Scavenge Plating gives you 40% more armor if you get 10 stacks. Scavenge Plating stacks have an individual duration, so getting a stack of Scavenge Plating does not refresh the duration of the other stacks, and that's why I run this with Persistence, to sort of give you more uptime on your stacks. Physical Mastery, basically just the more you push up, I think once you get Scavenge Plating to level 19, it goes to 5% more armor per Scavenge Plating. Anything above that is just Thorns damage. So, and that's another reason why I'm running Devastate, is when you break armor, you get Scavenge Plating, which gives you more armor. It's kind of just sort of handy like that. That's kind of the gist of it. There's not really much outside of that. What I'll do is I will throw these back in, and I'll quickly run through a tier 9 map, which obviously is not huge. It's not like a super difficult thing. Oh, actually, before I forget, one thing I mentioned before about Seismic Cry is how this ignores the cooldown, and why I mentioned that you'll get Seismic Cry after this is because Seismic Cry has a condition of if a heavy stunned enemy is hit, your next slam is empowered, but if not, your skill's cooldown is reset. So basically what that means is if you can have some way to avoid hitting a heavy stunned enemy, the cooldown will never trigger. So what you can do, if you did ever want to play this on another Ascendancy, I'm not really sure why you would, but at the same time, you would really have to path down to here anyway. Though I suppose you could do like, say like, I don't know, Chayula Monk hit based, but you wouldn't be. You would have to run. It'd be quite difficult to scale it because there's not a lot of just generic like damage modifiers that you can really apply to Warcry. But the way that you can do that is by using the pin support. The pin support makes it so that your skills cannot cause stun buildup. So you basically if you stop Seismic Cry from stunning, it will basically never trigger the cooldown. So if you did want to do this on another Ascendancy, that is something that you could use to do that. So I will quickly run I'll just do it in a tower. The Waystone is a tier 9. Area contains 18 additional packs of played monsters. They have increased stun and ailment threshold, and they penetrate 20% elemental resistance. My tree currently for the Atlas is I have Deadly Evolution, which gives rare and unique monsters in your maps have 1 to 2 additional modifiers, which can get kind of spooky. Increased Waystones, Quantum Rarity, 10% increased number of monster packs, and then local knowledge for just sort of increased drops for specific biomes. More currency in swamp and water, more gold in mountain biomes, more jewels in forest, more barriers and inscribed ultimatums in deserts, and then increased socket currency in grass biomes. I don't really pay too much attention to what maps I'm going to, because I'm lazy. So, so that's kind of it. And then I've got a 50% increased number of rare monsters, and rare monsters have a 30% chance to have an additional modifier. So these towers are kind of spooky for a lot of builds because you kind of you don't know what's in the room until you're in the room yourself. Build isn't super fast. That's kind of why I have shield charge. And literally the build just kind of revolves around this. I know that there are other people doing this kind of doing this build. I know that Steel Mage played this, and they would use things like Ancestral Warrior with Earth Shatter, because Earth Shatter raises up a spike, and that spike can be detonated with your Warcries. So it can kind of help your single target a bit, but I'm lazy as fuck, and I would much rather just scream at things endlessly. So one thing with Seismic Cry is if you hold the button down, you will go into this like slower movement speed, but with enough Warcry speed, if you just kind of tap cast it, you don't get nearly as much of a penalty. So if you... basically this is a good way to sort of like clear out the trash around and then sit casting. And then the one thing I was saying before is if you look at the damage of Seismic Cry, you'll see that its Corrupted Blood is 693 per second. With one Warcry you go up to 782 because you're getting 20% from one thing and then 8% per Warcry. So as you keep screaming, you basically double your damage just about, which is pretty good. And that's why that node, Deafening Cries, is really good for your damage. Because again, it's quite difficult to scale things that aren't considered attacks or spells. Cold damage is kind of your biggest issue, really. More or less just because of freeze. Being able to slap shit away endlessly is very good defensively. Probably a big reason why this works so well. Like this combination of Veil of the Night with Blackbraid would probably be infinitely worse without the ability to just knock stuff back. But it means that it's a very cheap way to deal with elemental mitigation, because you'll be stacking armor anyway, you'll be stacking strength anyway, so you'll get a shitload of life, you'll get a decent chunk of armor, which you could obviously get a lot more with better items, which would help you mitigate. And then later on you could obviously, you would probably want to switch this for Black Sun, or 15% increased strength, which is more damage and more life, and then a chest that actually has some stats on it. So you can definitely get better stuff. And on this as well, on body armors, you can get I think it's 10 to 20% of damage taken recouped as life. I got a pretty bad roll on this, but I'm too lazy to replace it, which is a recurring theme for most of my items. And this is I've killed bosses with 2 modifiers in tier 13 to tier 12, tier 13 maps. I've killed rares that have like 11 fucking modifiers or as close to, with all the extra modifiers from the 30% chance to get an extra one from the current precursor tablet I've got on, and the 1 to 2 modifiers from Deadly Evolution. And I have died 49 times. 3 of those deaths have been in maps, and I have been using Veil of the Night and Blackbraid since the end of the campaign. So this combo has definitely served me a lot better than I thought it would. And one of the deaths that I got was literally because I was standing still typing to my guild. But yeah, that's kind of it. It's a very long video, very rambly. I apologise. Any questions, let me know and I'll answer them as best I can, I guess. And yeah, good luck.